I used to think I had life figured out. You know, the kind of life where you find that one person, the right person, and you build everything around them. That was Lisa for me. She was my world, my anchor, my reason for everything. From the outside, it probably looked like we had it all. 11 years together. 11 years of thinking I was one of the lucky ones. Lisa wasn't like those other women, the ones you hear about, cheaters, liars, the ones who wreck homes without blinking. No, Lisa was different. She was loyal. I was sure of it. We built something real, something solid, something that I thought would last forever. How could I? She was everything to me, and I thought I was everything to her. Sure, I've seen it happen to other guys, friends, colleagues, men who thought they had it all, only to find out that the woman they loved had been unfaithful. I felt for them, I really did. But in the back of my mind, I always thought, that won't happen to me. Not with Lisa. We were different. We had something stronger, deeper. Or at least that's what I thought. You know what's funny? There's this nagging fear that lives inside all of us, especially men. The fear that one day you'll find out the person you love, the person you trust, more than anyone in the world, has betrayed you. You think you're immune to it because your relationship is special. Your partner would never do that to you. But then, there's this little voice, way in the back of your head, that says, what if? What if she's not who you think she is? What if everything you've built your life on is a lie? I always shut that voice down before it could take root. Because Lisa was different. I was sure of it. She wasn't capable of that kind of betrayal. She loved me. I gave her everything. My time, my energy, my love. I worked hard for our life, for her. I believed in the idea that loyalty meant something. That when you commit to someone, you don't break that bond. Not for anything. And I was loyal. I thought that was enough. That if I just kept doing everything right, if I just loved her the way I always had, that it would be enough to keep us safe. But there was always that nagging feeling. Just a whisper, really. It wasn't even something I could put into words. More like an itch in the back of my mind. The kind you can't scratch, because you don't even know where it's coming from. But I ignored it. I had built my entire life around her. The house, the routines, the plans for the future, they all centered on Lisa. In my mind, there was no room for doubt, no space for the possibility that she could be lying to me. It just wasn't possible. Not Lisa. But you know what they say about the truth. It has a funny way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. And no matter how hard you try to push it down, to ignore it, to pretend everything's fine, eventually it catches up with you. And when it does, it tears everything apart. It was one of those normal afternoons. You know, the kind where everything seems routine, like nothing out of the ordinary could happen. I was just getting home from work when my neighbor Tom waved me over. He's the friendly type, always up for a chat, so I didn't think much of it. But there was something in his face that caught me off guard. He wasn't smiling. "David, can we talk for a minute?" he said, and right there, I felt it. That first stab of discomfort. My gut knew something was off before he even opened his mouth. "Sure," I said, trying to brush off the feeling. "What's up?" He looked around, like he didn't want anyone else to hear, which only made me more uneasy. Then he said the words that hit me like a punch to the gut. "I've seen Lisa with another man." I stared at him, not really processing what he'd said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice sounding distant, like it belonged to someone else. He looked me straight in the eyes. "I've seen her, David. A few times. At that cafe on Elm. She's been meeting this guy, and it doesn't look innocent. I can't even describe what went through my head in that moment. It was like my brain refused to understand what he was saying. I laughed it off, even though it wasn't funny. "Come on, Tom, that's ridiculous. She wouldn't do that." But he didn't back down. I didn't want to say anything, but I thought you should know. I'm not trying to stir the pot here, man, but it doesn't look good. I should have thanked him, but I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, because the idea of Lisa, my Lisa, with another man, was something I couldn't compute. I felt my chest tighten. No way, it had to be a mistake. It had to be someone who looked like her. Or maybe it was just a casual meeting, a business thing, something, anything but what Tom was implying. But then that voice in the back of my head, the one I'd been ignoring for so long, it started whispering again. What if? What if Tom's telling the truth? What if the signs have been there all along, and I've been too blind to see them? I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. Not from a third party, not from someone outside our marriage. That's not how these things happen, right? If something was wrong, I'd know, I'd feel it. But Tom's words stuck with me like a bad taste I couldn't get rid of. I told him I'd look into it, but what did that even mean? How do you look into something like that? It wasn't like I was going to sit Lisa down and say, "Hey, the neighbor saw you with another guy. Care to explain?" It sounded ridiculous even in my head, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't shake it. All the way home, my mind kept racing. Maybe Tom had it wrong. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, there was that nagging feeling again, the one I had tried so hard to ignore for years. Maybe this was it. Maybe the fear I had always pushed aside was finally catching up with me. By the time I walked through the front door, I was already drowning in questions. Who was this guy? Why hadn't I noticed anything? Was I being a fool this whole time? And then Lisa greeted me, like nothing had changed, like we were still living that perfect life I thought we had. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day was. I smiled back, but it was forced. My mind was somewhere else. I couldn't stop thinking about what Tom had said, about how everything I thought I knew might be slipping through my fingers, and I didn't even realize it. I told myself it wasn't true. It couldn't be. But that little voice inside me wouldn't shut up. And suddenly, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath me was starting to crack. Eventually, the weight of it all became too much. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. The sleepless nights, the constant looping thoughts, the anger that simmered just beneath the surface. I needed to get it out. I needed someone else to tell me I wasn't crazy. Or maybe that I was. At that point, I didn't care which. I just needed some kind of validation. Something to push me one way or the other. I called my best friend Mark. We'd known each other since college, and he was the only person I could think of who might understand. I wasn't even sure how to start the conversation, but when he picked up, I just let it spill out. The confrontation, the doubts, the suspicion, everything. I laid it all out there like a confession, hoping he'd have some magic words to make it all make sense. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, thinking, and that silence was deafening. "Man," he finally said, his voice cautious. "I don't even know what to say. I mean, that's rough, really rough. Do you have any proof? I mean, besides what Tom said?" "No," I admitted. "It's just a feeling, but it's eating me alive." Another pause. Then he said the words I'd been dreading. "Look, I hate to say it, but if you're already doubting her, if you can't trust her, that's going to be hard to come back from. Even if she's telling the truth, that suspicion is going to be there, always. His words hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't telling me anything I didn't already know, but hearing it out loud made it real. The idea that even if Lisa hadn't cheated, even if everything was in my head, the damage was already done. The trust was already broken by suspicion, by doubt, by fear. But then he threw me a curveball. Look, man, don't throw away 11 years over a hunch. Talk to her. Really talk to her. Figure out if there's something deeper going on. Maybe it's something fixable. Maybe it's not as bad as it feels. That was the problem. Maybe. It was all maybes. And I wasn't sure if I had it in me to keep living in that limbo. But I thanked him, told him I'd think about it, and hung up the phone, feeling more lost than before. Then there was my mum. God, I didn't even want to go there. But part of me needed her advice. Needed that solid, unshakable wisdom only she could give, even though I already knew what she'd say. When I finally told her, I could hear the sadness in her voice, the disappointment. Not in me, not in Lisa, but in the situation itself. "Oh, David," she said softly, like I was still a kid with a scraped knee. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice raw, desperate. "I don't know what to do." She sighed, and I could picture her sitting there, holding the phone, in that quiet, thoughtful way she always did when something heavy was weighing on her. "Marriage is hard, honey. It's complicated, and sometimes it takes more from you than you think you have to give. But before you make any decisions, you need to ask yourself, can you live with this? Can you live with the doubt, with the fear? Because if you can't, then no amount of love is going to fix it." I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't know if I could live with it. But the way she said it, so simple, so clear, it made the choice seem even harder. I wanted to love Lisa enough to fix this. I wanted to be strong enough to push past the doubts and trust her again. But part of me knew that wasn't possible. Not anymore. I called my sister too, hoping she might have some different perspective, something I hadn't thought of. She was always the practical one, the one who didn't sugarcoat things. "David, I love you," she said, after I laid everything out. "But if you can't trust her, you're already halfway out the door. And you deserve to be with someone you can trust, someone who makes you feel safe. If Lisa isn't that person anymore, then maybe it's time to start thinking about what's best for you. What's best for me." That's what they all kept saying. But how was I supposed to know what that was? My entire life had been about what was best for us. Now I was supposed to figure out what was best for me. I wasn't sure I even knew how to do that. The conversations were all different, but in the end, they all left me with the same realization. No one could make this decision for me. No one could tell me if I should stay or go. Not Mark, not my mum, not my sister. It was all on me, and I hated that. I wanted someone to tell me what to do, to give me the answer, but that wasn't how this worked. I had to make the call. I had to decide if I was going to stay and try to fix what was broken, or walk away and leave everything behind. And I still didn't know. As the months went by, something started to change. Not all at once, and not in some dramatic way, but in small, quiet moments. I found that the days were no longer defined by the pain. The heaviness that had settled in my chest after everything with Lisa had lightened, just a little. Enough for me to breathe again. Enough for me to see beyond the wreckage of what I thought my life would be. I hadn't planned on meeting anyone new. In fact, the idea of starting over, of opening myself up to someone else, felt impossible at first. I was still healing, still working through the mess of emotions, the doubt, the fear. But life has a funny way of pushing you forward even when you're not sure you're ready. It happened in the most unexpected way. I was at a bookstore, flipping through some novel I wasn't even really interested in, just passing the time when she appeared. Emily. I didn't notice her at first, not really. She was just another person browsing the shelves. But then she smiled at me, this genuine, warm smile that caught me off guard. It had been so long since I'd seen a smile like that, one that didn't have layers of tension or hidden emotions behind it. We started talking. It was small talk at first, about the book in my hand, about her favorite authors, about nothing that really mattered. But it was easy, natural, and that was what surprised me the most, how effortless it felt. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't weighed down by the past. I wasn't thinking about Lisa or the betrayal or the endless questions I couldn't answer. I was just in the moment. I didn't expect anything to come of it. After all, I wasn't looking for a relationship. But as the weeks went by, we kept bumping into each other, and each time, the conversations grew longer, more personal. We'd grab a coffee, talk about our lives, our work, our dreams. She didn't pry into my past, didn't push for details I wasn't ready to share. She just listened, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I felt like me again. But with that feeling came the fear I'd been carrying ever since things fell apart with Lisa. How could I trust again? How could I open myself up to someone new, knowing what I'd been through, knowing how badly it could all go wrong? The walls I had built around myself were still there, strong and unyielding, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to let anyone in. One night, after another casual dinner with Emily, she looked at me, and I could tell something was on her mind. "David," she said softly, "I know you've been through a lot. You don't have to tell me everything, but I just want you to know, I'm here. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know you don't have to go through it alone." Her words hit me harder than I expected, because that's exactly how I had felt for so long. Alone. Even when I was surrounded by people, even when I was still with Lisa, I had felt completely alone in my pain, my confusion, my doubt. But Emily wasn't asking me for anything. She wasn't trying to fix me. She was just offering me space. Space to feel what I needed to feel, to move at my own pace. I realized then that maybe trust didn't have to be this all-or-nothing thing. Maybe it wasn't about tearing down every wall at once. Maybe it was about letting someone in, just a little, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, Emily could be that person. Not to fix me, not to replace what I had lost, but to be there with me as I figured out who I was becoming. It wasn't easy. Every time we got closer, that voice in the back of my head would whisper, "What if this ends like last time? What if you get hurt again?" The scars from Lisa hadn't disappeared. They were still there, deep and raw. But I started to understand that healing didn't mean erasing the pain. It meant learning to live with it, learning to move forward, even with the scars. Emily and I didn't rush things. There was no grand romance, no whirlwind love story. It was slow, steady, and exactly what I needed. She respected my boundaries, understood my hesitations, and never once made me feel like I had to be anything other than what I was. Someone who was still healing, still learning how to trust again. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized that trust wasn't about never being hurt. It wasn't about guarantees. It was about choosing to believe that not everyone would betray you, that some people were worth the risk. And Emily, she was worth the risk. We weren't perfect. I still had my moments of doubt, moments where the past crept in and made me question everything. But with Emily, I didn't feel like I had to pretend. I could be honest about my fears, my insecurities, and she didn't flinch. She didn't run. She stayed. And that was something I hadn't expected. That someone could see all my broken pieces and not turn away. That someone could still choose me, even when I wasn't sure I could choose myself. There was a time when I thought I'd never find peace again. When the idea of love, of happiness, felt like something that belonged to someone else. Someone who hadn't been through what I had. Someone who hadn't felt the sting of betrayal. I thought those things were gone for me, lost somewhere in the wreckage of my marriage. But with Emily, everything felt different. It wasn't some grand revelation or dramatic moment that made me realize I could be happy again. It was the little things, the small, everyday moments that I'd taken for granted in the past. The quiet nights where we sat together, talking about nothing and everything. The mornings when I'd wake up to her smile, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel that weight in my chest, the one that had been there since things fell apart with Lisa. It wasn't that the scars from the past had disappeared. They were still there, etched into me in ways I couldn't erase. But they didn't define me anymore. They didn't control me. I had learned to live with them, to carry them without letting them dictate my life. And more importantly, I had learned that love, real love, wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about never being hurt or never doubting. It was about choosing to trust again, choosing to let someone in, even when you're terrified of being hurt. Emily never pressured me. She never tried to replace what I had lost or fix what had been broken. She just was. She was there, patient, steady, and real. And that was what I needed more than anything. Not some whirlwind romance, not grand gestures, but someone who made me feel safe. Someone who made me feel like I didn't have to pretend anymore, like I could be myself, scars and all. The happiness I found with Emily wasn't the kind I had imagined all those years ago. It wasn't the picture-perfect life I had once built in my mind with Lisa, but it was real. It was deeper. It was honest. And in many ways, it was better than anything I had ever dreamed of. Because this time, I wasn't chasing an ideal. I wasn't holding on to an illusion of what I thought love was supposed to be. This time, I was letting it be what it was. Imperfect, messy, and absolutely worth it. I learned that love after heartbreak is different. It's quieter, more grounded. It doesn't come with the same naivety or blind trust, but that doesn't make it any less meaningful. In fact, it makes it stronger, because this time, I wasn't rushing in with rose-colored glasses, thinking love would solve everything. This time, I knew that love was work, that it required effort, patience, and a willingness to keep choosing each other every single day. And Emily and I, we chose each other, day by day, moment by moment. We built something together that was stronger because it was honest, because we had both been through our own struggles, our own pains, and we weren't pretending that love was going to fix it all. We understood that we were both healing in our own ways, and instead of rushing to the finish line, we took our time. We grew together, and with every step, I felt more like myself than I had in years. I used to think that happiness was something you found once, and if you lost it, that was it. But what I've come to understand is that happiness is something you build. It's something you choose over and over again, even when it's hard, even when it feels out of reach. And with Emily, I was finally building that happiness again. There were days when the past would still creep in, when the memories of what happened with Lisa would surface. But they didn't have the same hold over me anymore. They were just that, memories. They were part of my story, but they weren't the whole story. They weren't my future. My future was with Emily. My future was with the man I had become, the one who had learned to let go of the past and embrace the unknown, the one who had found strength in vulnerability, who had learned that trust wasn't about guarantees, but about taking a leap, knowing that you might get hurt, but doing it anyway because the possibility of love was worth the risk. And now, as I sit here, looking at the life we've built together, I realize that I'm happier than I ever thought I could be. It's not the happiness I imagined years ago. It's better because it's real, it's earned, and most importantly, it's mine.